So on page 81, he has an interesting commentary on communication, the difficulties of communication. So he has these kind of 4 steps. So first of all, when you're going to communicate something, you need to know what you want to communicate and how and kind of what words to use. And you're trying to be precise, but maybe not. And maybe you don't know what you're talking about. And so there's always that, first of all, that error in terms of, okay, are you going to say what you want to, what you mean to say? The second step then, of course, is putting that thought into words and choosing the right words. That's the first, and what he calls that the first translation. So you're translating thought into speech, and then now you're speaking, right? The third step is that the listener has to then hear everything you're saying and understand the words you're saying. And then the fourth step, of course, is then what you've said, the listener has to then translate that into thought, into ideas, etc. And he calls that the second translation. So whatever he heard from you, which may again not be exactly what you said, the other person then translates those words he heard into what he thinks they all mean. And that's that second translation. And then the author says that it is not difficult to see that much can go wrong at each stage of this 4-stage process. So I thought that was an interesting thing to kind of consider, is that especially when we are teaching, even more difficult when we are teaching, we are trying to transfer our thinking on a topic or certain math skills or certain knowledge about history or whatever it might be. We are trying to translate that so that another person can pick it up and more or less gain what we're trying to transfer. But within these 4 steps, you can have problems. You can have problems with communication. And I'm surprised, this particular skill, communication and persuasion, this particular skill was something that used to be taught and trained in a lot of the classical schools, like ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and even some of the old British schools. Because to be a leader of any kind of community, for example, or a politician or a statesman of any kind, you had to be able to write and speak very well. And that was called rhetoric. And that was also a book, one of Aristotle's books is called Rhetoric. And the old school of rhetoric was actually teaching the correct formulation of communication and persuasion. And that is something that's not discussed so much. Sure, we have in school, we have oral presentations, but little is discussed about the form of those presentations. And when we communicate, when we're trying to write things down, we are trying to communicate thinking. And when we are making speeches, we are trying to communicate thinking. And that is not as easy as simply being able to speak a language, right? Everyone can detect a great writer. Everyone can detect a great speech. All these things, of course, require planning and effort and organization. And that's not something that is as universal as it could be.